Thank you all for joining us this evening. This is the Committee of the Whole on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023 at 5 p.m. In City Hall in the Clarence C. Burns Council Chambers. Today we will hear City Council Bill 22-0152R, informational hearing on executive leadership and vacancies. Obviously, yes, particularly with yesterday's news, I would like to be very clear that this meeting was called well in advance of yesterday. Obviously, we know two high-ranking members of the administration were let go or have left their post. The reality is, at the end of the day, the executive branch and legislative branch is critical that we work together. We have the ability to have interface into the administration through many of these positions. When we see some turnover, it provides concerns. I would like to say that, as it relates to vacancies, this is not a Baltimore City issue. This issue is global. I think it's important for us to note, but it is also really important, I think, which was kind of the motivation of why the council wanted to sit down with the administration today and publicly just understand the plan that's in place. But the reason is, obviously the council has to do its job, and in order for us to do our job, we have to directly stay connected with the administration. When we see turnover of really key positions, and we learn about it through the media, whether it's specific requests or concerns that we have at that particular time and ways that we're working with individuals at that time, it's somewhat problematic. What I will say, and I'll personally say this as City Council President, I've seen, particularly since we had our new CEO, Faith Leach, come on board, the level of interaction between the administration and the council has significantly increased. I think one of the main conduits of that has been through the Chief of Staff. So it was somewhat surprising to us. We're not here to talk about the reasons behind or any of that. We're just really here to kind of look at the vacancies, see if there's any level of insight as relates to the plan moving forward, particularly as it relates to going into the budget. Now, the committee reached out to agencies and asked them to provide organizational charts, as well as vacancies or acting positions, and any other designation that personnel designation that the city kind of has for these particular positions. We received some, we haven't received others, and we'll kind of go through the list later. With that, just wanted to open and provide that opening. I think on the council we have Madam Vice President to my right, Sharon Green Middleton.
Thank you.
We have Chairwoman Danny McCray to her right.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Immediately to my left is the bill sponsor, and that's Councilwoman Felicia Porter.
Thank you.
To her left, we have Councilman Zeke Cohen. To his left, we have Councilwoman Odette Ramos. And then far left, we have Chairman Mark Conaway. I apologize for that. From the administration, I know we have Madam CAO Faith Leach, as well as Nina Themelis, and Director of HR Herbert. And I don't know the two. I'm sorry if you could pronounce your name.
Kelly Eastman, I'm Chief of Staff for the Baltimore City Health Department.
Okay, nice to meet you. And Sophia G.
Sophia.
Thank you. From Mayor's Office of Government Relations, and Liam Davis from Department of Transportation. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the sponsor of the bill to open us up as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I'd like to thank my colleagues for being here tonight to discuss this organizational health of our agencies. Secondly, I'm grateful to the agencies that have prepared data and presented reports, as well as those who have prepared testimony in efforts to engage this critically important question. This evening is a part of the Council's commitment to ensure that our city operations and delivery of services are effectively serving the residents of Baltimore City. Like any other urban city, we have been challenged with threats to our public health, safety, inflations, and shifts in our leadership. However, we are in a unique position to collaboratively reevaluate our city's agencies, and strategically plan for how our city's institutional knowledge are maintained and transferred when selecting and transitioning new leaders in their new role. Most importantly, this resolution urges the council to serve as a thought leader, partner, and accountability lever as government officials to collaborate on decision-making as it relates to operations of our city. There needs to be a shared understanding and expectation that cultivation of executive leadership is transferred in a way that prioritizes the growing needs of the people of Baltimore City and ensures seamless and efficient city services for all. Executive leadership succession planning is the process of identifying and developing potential candidates to assume top leadership positions in an agency in the case that current leaders retire, resign, or are unable to continue their duties. Succession planning ensures continuity of leadership, minimizes disruptions, and helps organizations to avoid the negative impacts of sudden leadership changes. Succession planning also involves a structured process for identifying the key leadership positions that require planning, the skills and competencies needed to fulfill these roles, and the prospective candidates who have the potential to develop these skills and competencies. This may involve a combination of internal promotion, executive recruitment, and/or hybrid approach that combines both. This piece of legislation seeks to provide a more transparent and documented process regarding communications to the council at large regarding the health of our agency and operations. I look forward to tonight's discussions that prioritizes operations of our government. These decisions may not be popular, these questions may be hard to answer, but these discussions and oversight will provide an added layer to ensure that Baltimore continues to receive its due diligence from the council and the administration on an iterative basis through these executive vacancy confirmation process and also through the management of our agencies. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Madam Councilwoman. At this time, we'll turn it over to the administration, I guess. Madam CAO Leach, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely. All right, good evening, council members, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on Council Resolution 23-0152R on executive leadership vacancies. Before I begin my formal testimony, I want to take the time to thank the hardworking public servants of Baltimore City government for their dedication and steadfast commitment to building a stronger, more equitable city. Investing in the city's human capital and co-creating alongside our agencies a culture that embraces innovation, promotes collaboration, and prioritizes service are top priorities for me in my role as city administrator. While governments, nonprofits, and the private sector all grapple with the changing workforce landscape, our city, with the leadership and support of Director Quentin Herbert, continue to work to recruit a world-class workforce that embodies our values. I want to highlight our progress and denote areas of opportunity and partnership with this body. Currently, the City of Baltimore has a vacancy rate of less than 5% for executive level roles, defined as grades 939 and above in the city's administrative manual. Our employee retention rate is around 87%. And while we have work to do to retain and grow our talent right here in the City of Baltimore, we have made significant progress. We are building a robust multimodal training program through DHR and have developed training opportunities through unique offerings like our Baltimore Data Academy in partnership with the Bloomberg Center for Government Excellence. And we have a new succession planning program to ensure the continuity of our government operations. And while our talented HR professionals have gone above and beyond to recruit and retain talent in the City of Baltimore, there are still areas of opportunity, including opportunities to partner with the council to solidify how we communicate and partner with around executive vacancies, which I'm happy to discuss during today's hearing. Here's what I know. We have some of the best professionals working right here in Baltimore City government. Every day, they choose our government. Council members, you have my commitment, and all of the employees of Baltimore City government have my commitment to continue the hard work of shifting our culture, of creating more career pathways into senior leadership roles, finding more opportunities to invest in training and career development of our employees, and when necessary, to go out to the market and to recruit the world-class professionals to work in our city. In conclusion, the mayor's office and the city administrator supports this resolution with a favorable position. The Mayor's Office and City Administrator thanks the Committee of the Whole for the opportunity to respond to Resolution 23-0152R and stands ready to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Madam CAO. I guess if it's appropriate, we'll go around. If there's any other comment from other agencies or representative from the administration before we get into questions. I'm not sure, Director Herbert, you're probably here just to answer questions. Is that accurate? All right. Does anyone else have anything to add at this time? No? All right. So I guess, Madam CAO, I guess when should the council expect to have a request that's been out there for quite some time from the administration as relates to just something as basic as org charts, filled out with the vacant positions, the acting positions, you know, from all the different agencies and departments under the mayor?
Yep, so we can turn that information around to you by the end of the week. I think we should get clear on which agencies. So there were a number of agencies that were referred for this hearing, which my understanding is focused on executive level vacancies.
Yeah.
And so for us, that would be the director, executive director, or commissioner of an agency.
Yeah.
And I think some of the requests that came in were for agencies that didn't have vacancies. But I mean, we're going into budget, so I'm happy to provide any org charts that you do not have that you would like. So if you send me a list, I will make sure that we get that information to you no later than Friday of this week.
Okay, just for the record, what we've asked the administration for and the emails that we sent out a couple of times is Mayor's Office of Government Relations, Health, Fire, Recs and Parks, Zoning, MONSE, City Solicitor, City Administrator, Office of the Mayor, DPW, DOT, and DHR. What we've received as of maybe an hour ago, and the ones that we kind of have on our desk are Zoning, Health, Fire, DPW, and DOT. So if you don't have those emails, we'll make sure that we get the
No,
email.
absolutely. I will follow up. I think there are a couple things that I can clarify. So within, if there are organizations that are within the mayoralty, so for example, for the Mayor's Office of Government Relations, that would be the Mayor's Office org chart, which we've provided to the council, but I'm happy to also provide that again. I actually can give it to you this evening. And then I think on zoning, we'll make sure that you get the zoning org chart. And what were the other ones that were missing? And we can of course cover all of this via email as well.
Yeah, I'll just make sure we send you the email of what we think we have.
Okay.
And what we asked for and the delta we can figure out.
Yep, and we'll package it all together. So we'll resend all of the org charts and then put together a chart of what you all requested and what we have submitted.
Yeah. The only other thing is, this is more aesthetics. Is there any way to just develop a organizational chart template throughout the organizations?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
you understand? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I mean,
On
uniformity.
my to-do list, sir.
Okay. All right. Nina, I'm sorry. Did you have your hand raised? Would you?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to clarify, and we can follow up afterward, but I know that MONSE initially had been referred, but that was actually a referral for the Office of Neighborhoods, so there were just a kind of few questions that we had to clarify. So we just want to make sure that whichever reports or org charts you want that you receive, but just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
I appreciate it. I'm pretty sure the council will be happy with both. At this time, I'm going to go to sponsor the bill.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. And I just, CAO Leach, I want to clarify, because my team spent significant efforts with, sending you all themes and also questions related to this particular hearing. And so it's not just the executive vacancies, it's succession planning,
Oh, of course.
standard operating procedures for each agency, and having that being presented to the council. Understanding that communication is key as we kind of really understand the organizational health of each agency, but sharing those standard operating procedures so that we know if there is any vacancy within the administration, the council knows we have a procedure of notifying the council what the timeline and transition plans are going to be, and what HR is doing with regard to recruitment of said vacancy. So I just want to clarify for the public, it's not just looking at those agencies that don't have an executive at the helm. It is really about developing standard operating procedures for the council so that we can hold each other accountable and really understand as far as where you are in the timeline of recruitment and retention, but how you're communicating to the council as well.
Absolutely. And so thank you for that clarification. And I do want to acknowledge the amount of time that you've spent with our team in preparation for this hearing. I think we are happy to spend some time, you and I discussed this earlier, around the specific standard operating procedures as it relates to the council. Our HR director can talk about our overall standard operating procedures, and of course we have an administrative manual by which we operate and we function under. And so that outlines some of the specific details of what happens in an agency leadership transition. All of those things are well documented within our administrative manual. But as it relates to council communication, I think that there's an opportunity for us to work together on what we want that to look like. I want to acknowledge some of the progress that we have made there, and obviously there's still room for growth. But since I have come in as city administrator, I think we've had one director transition, Jason Perkins Cohen, who is now over at the state, and you all received that notification from me, written, a formal memo that was submitted to the council, same memo that was submitted to the cabinet. In addition, I think when we had the extension of one of our directors, you all also received a formal notification. And so as it relates to agency directors and those council confirmed positions, you have my commitment that I will continue to communicate with you all in advance of those vacancies coming to fruition. You have my commitment that I will ensure that I continue to send you all that information in advance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to go a step further.
Yes.
Not confirmed vacancies, but again, we had 2 major transitions in the last 2 days, and the council has yet to receive any type of notification from the administration regarding those transitions. And so it's not necessarily just confirmed vacancies. We need to know what's happening at every level of the process so that when we are, what's the word I'm looking for? Where we're contacted by our constituencies and other entities, we really understand what's happening so that we can provide comment as well.
Yep. So I think when it is appropriate and when those things are final, then you have my commitment to continue to inform the council and work with MOGR to ensure that the council is informed about transitions.
Chairwoman McCray?
Director Herbert, it's stated within your report that regional candidates have identified the residency requirement as a barrier to moving forward in a recruitment process, as our local ordinance does, rightfully so, state that you need to live in the city. I firmly believe that our top executive leaders need to live in the city. So it goes into, I'm going to go into my question. Since we know that like recruitment and retention issues, there have been recruitment and retention issues nationally. We all know that. And municipalities have all taken various courses of action to incentivize applicants at all levels to actually apply for these vacant positions. I know that one of the incentives that we do offer executive leaders sometimes is a moving cost. Sometimes it's going to be a payment for like rental or just like a rental cost for a certain amount of time. Can you speak more about the incentives that we offer executive position applicants and also if the incentives have proven effective?
Yes, thank you for the question, Madam Councilwoman. The incentives that we offer under the policies for moving expenses and other executive recruitment expenses, the moving expenses only are applicable if the candidate is relocating from more than 50 miles. And so for many of our regional talent that are in other counties, they would not be eligible for a relocation fee. or for a rental in the interim while they search for housing in the city. What I will say is that we have had several candidates that have identified the residency requirement as a barrier in recruitment. In fact, we have one agency where we've been recruiting for a bureau head for quite some time, and a person has been acting in an interim capacity, and that person would be, quite frankly, the ideal candidate for the position. But they don't want to sell their house in the county to move into the city and start over again. And so that has been a barrier to them applying. I agree with you that the city has talent and that we should look from within to fill these key roles in the city. But the reality is, particularly for these executive level positions, we are recruiting with not only with our local neighbors in our local counties, but we're competing regionally and even nationally for talent for many of these positions. What we are seeing is that many governmental entities are doing things to open the door to get more candidates in the pipeline, not being restrictive in keeping more candidates out of the pipeline. And even with our recruitment for the fire chief position, that was something that was shared with our senior recruiter as a potential barrier to a potential candidate who has the credentials and has the experience and has all of the qualifications, but that was a real potential barrier for that candidate in submitting their resume and application.
Let me follow up on, no, I'm going to say this first. Any bureau head or anybody in DPW, our workers who are on the front line, they live in this city. Any executive leadership position for those agencies or any agencies where you're making a certain amount of money, I know when you make money, you're spending it in the city. I'm getting my gas at Glenmore Gas in my district. I'm going to go to my Aldi's in my district first. I'm going to go to my Giant to spend money because I know that those folks who work in those places live in my district, and that money is going to go further in the city. So I understand that other cities may be offering things to regional candidates, but these workers that they're going to be serving in a lot of these agencies, they live in the city. And these executive leaders should live in the city too. And I know you're saying the same thing. I know you're just saying that there are barriers, but that's my comment. I do want to follow up and ask you, what other incentives do we offer, if any? And all these incentives effective for the people who are taking them, like our DPW director, I'm pretty sure he got a moving expense, so he got that rental expense as well, possibly. But are these showing that they're effective, what we're actually putting out?
I would say that they are. And I would also start with this. I think that our compensation for people in these executive levels is very competitive. We not only benchmark ourselves against Maryland counties and Maryland jurisdictions, but we also benchmark against economically similar cities as well that look like Baltimore. And we also benchmark ourselves against, it's a term of art, the Amtrak cities, as I know Councilman Middleton will probably be familiar with that term of art. It's the cities from DC up to New York City. So DC, Baltimore, Philly, New York, New Jersey. And we compare ourselves to those Amtrak cities as well. And what we find is that at this executive level, this agency head, deputy agency head level, we are very competitive. Anecdotally, we successfully sourced the candidate who is now our current director of finance. And one of the things that he mentioned when he got here was how competitive the salary in Baltimore City was compared to some other jurisdictions that he was looking at. And so I think that we start there. Our compensation package is very competitive at this level. We also have very robust benefits, even when compared to other public sector employers who traditionally have more robust health benefits than the private sector. We outpace them with the benefits offerings that we offer. We also have a very competitive retirement package as well. So I think that we start there with our overall total compensation, which is very competitive at these levels, and then those incentives on top. When we're recruiting someone from out of state, it has become the norm that if a person is moving and relocating, that the employer will cover those expenses. So while that is an incentive, it has come to be the expectation in the marketplace. And I think that it is, I wouldn't say that it's effective, I think it's the norm, that when someone is relocating from another state, another place, that the city covers those transition expenses for them moving. There are also other benefits that executive candidates have negotiated. There is the opportunity for candidates to negotiate certain other benefits and perks, and those are, again, things that candidates will say, I will need this in order to come. It may be that I need 6 months of a rental property while I find a place to live. It may be that I need a gas stipend or a fuel stipend or something along those lines. Or it may be that I need to have a commitment from the city that I'll be eligible for professional development, that you'll pay for my certifications, if any. And those are all things that candidates negotiate during that process where we have identified a candidate and we're negotiating terms for employment.
So although a residency requirement, which is saying is although a residency requirement may not attract our regional, some of our regional applicants, so they may want to come here, they have the opportunity to negotiate other terms as well.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They do, Madam Councilwoman. But I would just say that when we're talking to a candidate that is in another state, for example, the DPW director was in Oakland. When we're talking to somebody that's out of state and they're making that transition anyway, it's not a difficult sell to tell them you have to reside in the city of Baltimore. They're coming here from another state. When someone lives 10 miles from here and we're telling them that if you want this position, you've got to live here, which means if your house is paid for in the county, you either have to purchase a house here or a residence here or sell your house and move here. It becomes less attractive to those candidates. And many times those candidates are people who they live in the region, they understand the unique challenges that Baltimore City faces, and many times they have a skill set where they could come in with minimal training and minimal upstart and hit the ground running. And that has been, I would be lying to you if I told you that has not been an issue in our ability to attract candidates from the state of Maryland, from the region, to come to Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have one additional question. Recently in Falciao, you did note, hey, some of the stuff is not final. But recently, our former health commissioner, she announced a transition, or the mayor announced a transition. That's the one item I don't see on the chart within the DHR report. And I just want to know, since learning of our commissioner's transition, what recruitment efforts has the agency deployed to hire a full-time commissioner?
Yep. So I'll start, and then I can transition it to the HR director. So our health commissioner, who really has done an amazing job, I think we all can acknowledge, leading our city, especially through the public health emergency, now is taking on a promotional opportunity to become Deputy Mayor of Equity, Health, and Human Services. And she herself is committed to helping to find the next health commissioner. And so I actually had a conversation with her earlier today where she was talking about some potential candidates and some of the work that she's doing to explore her own networks to help us identify the right leader to transition the health department in the right way. Because I think we are at a critical juncture as it relates to our health department and public health in our city. Yeah. In addition, Beth Blower, who recently joined our team as well on temporary assignment from Hopkins, also has lent her support and the support of the university in helping us to identify a world-class public health professional to lead the health department. And so in some cases, and I think we all are aware of this, we have to, of course, look in our backyard, but we also have to be very intentional about recruiting and finding the talent that we want, right? And that might mean poaching talent from other places. And that might mean looking through our networks and tapping talent to potentially come to Baltimore. That is how I got here. And so we're being very thoughtful about that approach. And while we are leaning on DHR to lead the formal process, we are also having those critical conversations with folks in our network that we think can be that world-class leader that we need in public health in Baltimore.
Thank you. I'm looking to see if outside of tapping our network out as we should, we want the best. Outside of tapping our network and looking for individuals, have we gotten any further? Where are we at in this process? That's the only one I don't see here.
Right, and I think that let me explain in my memo I explained the process. It's when we formally receive the request to post is when we tamp up those recruitment efforts. And so once we receive the request to post, we will create the requisition, we will post the position, and our senior recruiter will begin that process of both posting and then doing that outsourcing and looking for talent and sourcing talent for the administration to consider.
Okay, so DHR has not started that process yet.
That's correct.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you.
No, thank you. I guess kind of turning the tide a little bit, when we talk about personnel, we talk about vacancies, but then we talk about these acting positions. And when we see these permanent acting positions in really important roles, be it in law, Rex and Parks, DPW, law procurement. Our procurement chief was acting for, I think, over 2 years. Since I've been there, what's her name? Keisha Brown? DOT, so really important roles throughout city government. What's the strategy when we have folks that are in positions that are acting for over 2 years? Is there a commitment of the administration to kind of evaluate that? I mean, right now, from a council perspective, we've had an act-in person at Mayor's Office of Government Relations for quite some time. That position has been open. So I guess our concern is when we look at these positions that are acting, what is the strategy on trying to get talent and make those positions permanent? I'm appreciative of Director Herbert when he talks about the level of competitiveness, and it seems like either the person that's acting in the role, that's running really important tasks on a daily basis, that's dealing with the council, that's really following up with us and dealing with our constituents' concerns on a regular basis. It appears if they're in that role for 2 years or 2.5 years, that maybe they're the right person for the job because we can't find someone else. So just want to really understand the strategy around these permanent acting roles that we have throughout city government.
Yep. So I'll let the director get into the specifics because we do have definitions around acting, interim that we operate under, which are, again, in our administrative manual. But to answer your question about what the strategy is always to get the right person in the right role. And so often, and sometimes that can take time to get the right person in the right role. And there are often times when we have candidates that are in roles that maybe don't want those roles, right? Like they, are happy to step into that leadership vacuum to provide continuity within the agencies, but may have indicated that that is not a role that they want to take on permanently. So for example, in the department, our chief of procurement, for example, we are actively recruiting a chief of procurement. I think I had 2 interviews this week for a chief of procurement. That is a role that we want to get right. Given the challenges that we've had around procurement in the city and given where we are around doing this, the procurement reform work that we started last year. And so we want to get the right procurement professional in the door. And so there are instances where we will have folks who are going to be, I think prior to Director Mitchell, we had an acting DPW leader for 18 months or close to 2 years. That is a difficult role to fill. And we want to fill that role with the right talent that can help us do the turnaround that many of our agencies need. And so sometimes it does take a little bit longer to fill some of those key roles. But I'll turn it over to Director Herbert, who can talk specifically about the interim and acting.
Yeah, and before we go over the classifications, definitely want to make sure we're all on the same page with that. I guess this was where I was piggybacking off of Chairwoman McCrae's line of questioning. And we brought up one particular role. Obviously, there's several. But when we look at procurement, I believe that was just put out there and advertised maybe a couple months ago. But she was acting for years, right? And not to talk specifically about her or about that position, it appears that if we have a critical role and maybe someone is just filling in that vacuum, which is fine and understandable, that we would be actively attempting to recruit for those critical roles. So with that one example, what I'm seeing as problematic is a person is in the role, right? Again, not about her or not about this role, but the person's in a role, and we weren't actively recruiting until maybe a couple months ago. Which is a really, really important role. I mean, I know when the mayor came into office, one of his main things was procurement, particularly as it relates to equity through procurement. So I guess that's where the concern is. When we look at some of the other positions that are around the city government that are really in key high performance roles critical to the council, that we aren't openly seeking positions. What is the strategy there? When we're not openly, forcibly trying to fill those roles.
Yep. So I think because we're talking about procurement specifically,
Yeah, and I hate to
and not
continue
any
to talk
one
about that
person,
one job,
but just
but
for example, so procurement is within the Department of Finance, right? And we had a leadership transition and a retirement as the head of the Department of Finance. There is a strategy around allowing executives that we recruit into this government to fill key roles on their teams, right? And so we have now recruited, I think, a world-class professional and Michael Moisev to lead the Department of Finance. And one of the immediate things that he wanted to do was recruit a new head of the Bureau of Procurement, for example. So I think that there are times where we want to be strategic about leaving a vacancy so that a leader can come in and bring the talent that they need to get the job done.
No, totally understand, and I continue to hate to make this about one position, but I think just the strategy, I think we have a real problem, right?
Okay.
Because that particular role, well before the former director of finance had communicated that he was leaving, again, he was there for almost 2 years, that role was acting. I mean, so when this new council took over, we met a procurement officer, head of procurement, who was acting. And it stayed acting, and we didn't see any activity to try to go out and fill that vacancy. So I think that I'm asking the administration to just take a step back, do our overall evaluation of particularly key city positions where we have acting roles, and if we aren't actively trying to fill those positions with a permanent person, what is the strategy and why? And I think that's only fair for us to really understand, because, you know, the reality is this council, as it relates to fighting and speaking up for our constituency, you builds relationships and knows how to go to folks, you know, what to say, what not to say, who to contact. Once we get a new change of regime, it kind of sometimes starts that whole process all over again. And then when we have the abrupt departure, things that were working in the pipeline, sometimes that stuff kind of just falls to a wayside. So I guess that is where the concern is when we're talking about this. So thank you, Madam CEO.
I appreciate that.
Director, if you could kind of go over the explanation and classifications.
Sure. At first, I think before getting into specifics, it's a term of art. There's a slight difference between interim and acting. A person is serving in an interim capacity when there is no person in that leadership position, and they're it for a period of time, for whatever period of time that is. When a person is acting, there is a person that's in that position, but for whatever reason, that person is incapacitated, unavailable, might be out on FMLA leave, whatever the case may be, and a person is acting in that capacity. So it's slightly different, although the functionality is quite similar. With respect to I hate to go back to this position, but the procurement officer, that was a position that was posted. There was not a successful candidate, and so the person that was acting continued to act. In between the first posting and the current posting, Phase 2 of Workday went live. And so there was a strategic decision that was made by the then director of the Department of Finance to not create large level change in that agency and that bureau while we were undertaking a massive project such as Phase 2 of Workday. And so the thought was to keep that person in the position so that you have a certain level of business continuity and consistency until we got to the end of this project, when the position could be reposted and strategically search for a leader at that time. There are a number of factors that weigh into when a position is posted, when you want to go after your recruit for the full-time position, as opposed to having someone serve in an interim capacity. I'm sitting in this seat today because someone thought to have me serve in an interim capacity at the Department of Human Resources, and it worked out, and I was offered the position. Sometimes we find that next level leader through having them serve in an interim capacity. And we can watch through that interim process as they serve, how the team interacts with them, how they do the work, right? And will they be an appropriate fit for that position? And that may lead to an offer and them serving in that full-time position. We do have a policy, AM 214-1 Part 3, that deals with out of title for folks that are at the bureau head and up level, right? And our policy doesn't provide hard and fast timelines for how long a person can act in an acting capacity or an interim capacity. Ideally, you want to find, as Madam CA indicated, you want to find the best person for the job as quickly as possible and get them in the position. But sometimes it's difficult to identify that talent and source that talent. And so what we are looking at, we've benchmarked some other areas, and we found that there is no really hard, fast rule around a time frame for an interim. Some are as little as 6 months. Some are as much as 18 months or 2 years. The idea is that you want to have a certain level of continuity and consistency in that position while you source the talent. It would be catastrophic if you remove a person from an interim status and you don't have the person that's going into that position. That would have catastrophic impact to operations. And so many times that interim person can stabilize, and in many instances, that person may be offered the job. I indicated there was an example earlier where the interim person was offered the job. They were doing a fantastic job as the interim bureau head. The staff liked them. They were getting things done. They were responsive, but they did not want to accept the position because it would require a relocation for them. And that wasn't conducive to their alignment with their family and their family decision. So they opted to decline the offer, and they're continuing to act in an interim capacity while we are actively recruiting and sourcing talent. I'll also say that I think that someone mentioned the Mayor's Office of Government Relations, which is a position that we extensively recruited for. In fact, we vetted over 40 candidates. And we had a number of interviews, and there was no candidate that was successful that was recommended to the administration. The interview panel could not come to consensus on advancing any of those candidates. And so that position has been reposted, and we are sourcing a new tranche of talent. That happens sometimes. And if we are really wanting to put the right person in the right position, we don't want to just forward someone to check a box and say that we put someone in the position. We want to put someone in the position that will be successful, that has the skills, knowledge, and ability that can actually perform at the level that this city requires, and quite frankly, that our citizens deserve.
And I think everyone on the panel, as well as all of my colleagues, would totally agree with the last statement, that we want the right person, someone who's competent, ready to serve, and really drive at going after driving more effectiveness and efficiency as it relates to city government. Totally agree with that. I also will say, and I'm gonna jump on a limb, if anybody doesn't agree, you can tell me that this is not true. The council's okay with having interim and acting individuals that we have to deal with on a daily basis. We also understand the concern of just because of arbitrary day of maybe 60 or 90 or 120 days or a year and a half, just removing someone because they've been in that position for interim, that provides some level of instability. I think the root of the question, the motivation of the question is it has appeared that there have been several really important positions and roles that we're dealing with individuals where there is not active recruiting to try to fill that position. And if the administration is saying no, when we look across the board through city government, all of the acting and interim positions, we are aggressively going after to try to find the right person for those jobs. I think that's what the answer to the question is. I don't know if that's necessarily the perception of the council, nor of some of the folks inside of the agencies associated with some of these positions. The one position that I'll talk about and interested in where we are with it is the chief of the fire. Ultimately, everybody can opine on how they feel about it. But I think many people feel as if he was used as a scapegoat with the Stricker Street fire. I think that he has been a committed servant to the city of Baltimore. I think it's really hard to kind of replace that. And I'm really interested in, what have we done since then to try to actively figure out who our next fire chief is?
And I thank you for the question, Mr. President. What I can tell you is that we posted that position. We also, our senior recruiter, and I think it may be helpful if, for the record, with the process, once we receive a request to post one of these executive level vacancies, agency head, even deputy agency head, DHR has one senior recruiter. She, in a past life, was a headhunter, so she has many contacts. She is responsible for sourcing candidates and doing outreach, as well as vetting those candidates who have applied through our website. And so once candidates have been vetted, she prepares summaries based on her discussions with them. Those summaries, along with resumes and applications, are forwarded to the hiring manager, who would forward that then to the interview panel. And then those candidates are scheduled for interviews. I'm happy to say that for the fire chief position specifically, we forwarded 19 resumes to the hiring manager, who is the deputy mayor of public safety. We had some 40 candidates that expressed interest. Our senior recruiter vetted all of them and forwarded 19. We have initial interviews scheduled. Once those initial interviews conclude, if there are candidates that will be advanced, they will be advanced to the administration's executive team for a second round of interviews. And hopefully our next fire chief will be in that tranche of candidates, right? We have been recruiting for a number of these positions, the director of DPW, and just to give you some context around some of the things that we do, the director of DPW is a very niche skill set. And so we may not just find our talent by LinkedIn or some of our other more traditional modes by which we source talent. And so we've effectively gone to the National Association of Cities and posted there, the National League of Cities. We've also gone to SWANA, which is the Solid Waste Association of North America, and posted there. We have also tapped into some of our other contacts in the industry. We've leveraged our relationship with the current director to identify any potential talent and have reached out, done an aggressive outreach to those potential candidates as well. That said, we have forwarded so far 4 candidates to the hiring manager there. And again, it's because it is a skill set that is required. We've had about 13 people submit resumes, and we are continuing to actively recruit in a number of different modes to fill that vacancy. With respect to, I mentioned the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. I will also mention that we have been sourcing talent for the Fire and Police Retirement Systems Executive Director. My team has been working with an outside firm that the F&P retirement system has retained. I am very proud of the work that our recruiter has done. She recruited our director of finance. She worked to help recruit our director of the convention center. There are a number of vacancies that she has helped fill. And in fact, when we were recruiting for the director of finance, we also had a parallel contract with a recruitment firm that specializes in public sector recruitment. And while the recruiter was telling us, your salary's too low, the residency requirement is a bar, we're not getting good candidates, you gotta fix these things, our senior recruiter actually was the one that found our current director of finance. So I would put our senior recruiter against any of these firms any day of the week, and I'm very proud of the work that she does and each and every day. That said, you mentioned it earlier, this is not a Baltimore City problem. We are in a executive leadership crisis in this country.
Workforce is
In fact, 3 weeks ago, I was with the executives at the Society of Human Resources Management in Washington, well, in Reston, Virginia, and one of the top 5 things on their list is the lack of skilled talent across the workforce. And that employers are having to be creative with how they fill these roles and even rethinking and re-engineering how some of the work is done because of this lack of skilled talent. So I think that we are committed to, again, finding the right candidates for these positions, and we will continue to work with the administration to communicate with you. I think that sometimes if the activity is not on the forefront, there's the perception that there's a lack of activity when we are behind the scenes actively recruiting for these executive vacancies.
Thank you. We're going to go to Madam Vice President, then Chairman Costello, then Chairman Conway. I guess the one takeaway, Madam CAO and Director Herbert, if we could have a list of all the acting positions to the level we're talking about, executive, and the current status as relates to where they are in the process of recruiting, openly being engaged on recruiting new talent to those positions. Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. That mask was keeping me warm. I took it off. I'm cold again. I listened to what you said, Quentin, a lack of skilled talent basically happening around the country. And it's, I'm a strong believer of strong training within government. And, was brought up thinking that, if you were interested in working in government, that you get your job and you get heavily trained and you work your way up the ladder. And, listening and I guess piggybacking on everything that was said, why do we continue to right away look nationally when we really we have an opportunity here to set up some really strong developed training and starting, and I think our mayor really kind of started this opportunity by allowing, or taking away some of the requirements. So it's giving you that opportunity to really push the importance of training within. We have some dedicated employees that we all know in all the departments. And honing in, they have performance reviews, they meet goals, we're teaching them how to be leaders in what they're doing presently and hopefully progressing them. It's like we're like a school in a sense. And it sounds like, and I'm hoping that you are working on developing a program to reach in that, to start that process, especially since we're lacking in skilled talent. And Baltimore is a a small town. We know each other. You know, we're big, but we're really small. We know each other. People that graduate from our schools, they get jobs with our city. It's, you know, just talk about, I want to know what you are doing to start the change of things.
Thank you for that question, Madam Vice President. And let me just take a moment to echo something that you said. We have some of the hardest working, most dedicated public servants in the world in Baltimore City. Our men and women work extraordinarily hard, and that's not just at the executive level, that's up and down city government. I am very proud of a program that we started this year through a partnership with the University of Baltimore. It is the CPM, or Certified Public Manager Program. And so we have sent, in January, we sent 15 of our people leaders through this program at the University of Baltimore, which is classroom instruction in finance, human resources, equity and inclusivity, and ethics. And there is classroom training, there is a capstone project that they have to complete, and when they complete the project successfully, they receive the Certified Public Manager credential from the University of Baltimore. It is a program that some of our most high-functioning leaders in city government have completed. My former Assistant Deputy Chichi Niaganash was one of the first to complete the CPM program at UB. It is a phenomenal program. We sent 15 this year. It was the first year that we had a centralized process. In the past, agencies that had the money in their budget may send 1 or 2 employees through the program. Many agencies didn't have that as a line item in their budget. We were able to fight to get funding to send 15 people per semester. So 30 in a year will go through that program. These are those, to your point, those people who are in mid-level management, in that beginning to lead people, that they are gaining skills and credentials that will help them to be those next level leaders who will take on additional responsibility. We also have built a very robust curriculum in our Learning and Development Office. We have a leadership skill path training for those who are people leaders. It is available virtually. Employees can take the training at their leisure. We also have some in-person options available. And we have been trying to talk to our employees and provide offerings that meet our employees where they are. Everyone is not a visual learner. Some people are auditory learners. And so we've developed a podcast style of learning that is available to our employees at the click of a button, where they can listen while they're driving in or while they're at the gym, and they can get that information, right? That professional development that helps them. Another thing that is critically important is the performance management and talent management modules that are currently in Workday. Talent management allows an employee to put any certifications, education, training that they've completed in their employee profile. If they speak a foreign language, they can put that in their employee profile. That allows us to see what skills and talent our employees have and identify those employees who may be ready to take on additional duties and responsibilities based on the skills that they have identified that they have. Also, performance management. You mentioned performance management, and I will say this, performance management was scattershot in the city at best. There was not a central repository where that data was housed. Agencies could not tell you what percentage of their employees had had a performance appraisal in a given year. Workday Performance Management now gives us line of sight to employees who have not had performance evaluations, to managers that aren't conducting them, And it also allows us to, again, see through those results, those high-performing employees who are consistently performing above and beyond, who are ready to take on additional responsibilities. Those are two tools that will be invaluable for us in identifying those employees who will be the recipients of that knowledge transfer and who will be those next level leaders in the agencies when there is a vacancy that arises at the executive level. We are feverishly trying to provide options for our employees in professional development. I actually took a contingent of HR leaders last Thursday to the Chesapeake Human Resources Association spring conference because I believe in professional development, and I took 13 people from our agency to get that training and that development, because the reality is one of them may someday be sitting right here. And what we pour into them today will determine in many instances how successful they are when they are tasked with those leadership roles. So I appreciate the question. We are working, I think the CPM program, the short answer is the CPM program, our learning and development, augmented by performance management and talent management and Workday will get us there.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I inadvertently skipped over the sponsor of the bill, so we're going to go to sponsor bill, then we'll go to Chairman Costello, and then Chairman Conway.
No worries. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Director Herbert, I want to just kind of go back to what you were talking about, the CPAM program. How many have finished the program thus far?
The first contingent is finishing up now. So we will have 15 that will have completed by the end of the month. They're working on their capstone project now. And the second group will go in the fall.
Will go in the fall, okay. And so of those 15, how many of those have we identified that can possibly serve in middle management and/or feeders to the leadership capacity?
They are already in middle management.
They're already in middle management.
These are people leaders. The Certified Public Manager program is for people leaders who are either experiencing their first time in management, or they may be seasoned managers who need a refresher or who want to get that credential. That Certified Public Manager credential. In this last class, our 15 students, I'll say, were in a class with, there was a director of finance, there was a city manager from a smaller city, there was a line supervisor from an operational agency. So it runs the gambit of the level of leadership that folks are in this, that go through this, matriculate through this program. But it gives them a good foundation in the foundational agencies that operate in a public sector. So finance, HR, ethics, it gives them a good grounding. And the most important piece to that is they have access to the staff at UB, but they also have access to one another. And they get to build their social contacts and folks who are leading in other places where they can then build out that network as well.
Yep. And just to that point, so my predecessor and I both completed a Certified Public Manager program, not the one in partnership with the University of Baltimore, but a program in partnership with George Washington University. So this is a best practice that we are seeing jurisdictions across the country do, that Director Herbert has brought here to Baltimore.
And are you all increasing that percentage of people that actually go through this program for next rounds of cohorts?
We will look into that. Again, there is a cost associated with that program, and what we had budgeted was 30, 15 each semester. But that is something that we can look into and how we can leverage to maximize on that program.
Okay. And then I had a question related to succession plans. One of the things that I don't want us to forget as a purpose of this informational hearing is really understanding the succession plans and/or transition plans. Is there a template in the administrative manual that each of the executives, should they leave their posts, they are required to do some sort of transition plan and/or succession planning for their agency? And who gets that report?
Yeah, that is not in the administrative manual. What we did produce, what we do have in place is a framework for succession planning. And to your point, one of the things that we look at is identifying those persons who have demonstrated the ability to transfer knowledge to them, to take on more responsibility, but also how we better leverage those feeder positions, those lower level mid-management positions, to begin early and often preparing people for higher levels of leadership in the future. It's a framework. Again, each agency head has a certain level of autonomy in how they prepare that plan. I will say that another thing that we look at is the continuity of operations plan as well, because one of the things that continuity of operations looks at is what do we do if the agency head is not available? So who's next up? Who's next up after that? And what do we do if that happens? So every agency was tasked with producing a COOP plan. And part of that COOP plan is that contingency for what happens in the absence of leadership, the immediate leadership that's present now.
Mr. President, I'd like to make 2 formal requests, please. I'd like a succession plan and transition plan from each agency so that the council can actually review. And then number 2, if we can have some sort of matrix and schematic of who is next in line from each agency. You mentioned that you have a COOP plan. Has that been shared with the council? Or is that more of an internal document?
I don't believe agency COOP plans have been shared with the council. Let me follow up on that request.
Okay, thank you.
As it relates to the individual agency succession plan, what we can provide for you is the detailed framework that we've shared with agency directors around succession planning, and then we can follow up to see if you have additional requests.
Sure, and just as a follow-up, is it something that each agency is it standardized between each agency, or does the agency have autonomy to do different frameworks or plans related to their agency?
So we provide the framework for the agencies. It is not a standardized document that each agency submits. They have a framework that DHR has developed for each agency, and they develop their succession plans within that framework. So this is guidance for them to develop.
This is guidance for them?
Yes.
And so do we?
And this is a new program.
Okay, so that was going to be my question, my follow-up question. Has this been developed in the past, and has that been shared with DHR? Like, do they currently have something on file now, or is this something that they're developing right now as it relates to this request?
No, it's developed. We do have that guidance document that we have provided. I will also say that another tool that we have that we are working to implement will be the succession planning module within Workday. Workday actually has a succession planning module. Again, it leverages the data that we receive from performance management and from the talent management profile, and it helps us to identify next level talent. And what agencies can then do is to identify those employees and begin that process of developing them and preparing them for knowledge transfer.
Okay, and then I have one more question, sir. With regard to the interim and acting status, even though there's not a timeline, what other evaluation criteria are you using in order to kind of determine whether a candidate is ready or not? As the council president mentioned, more on like 18 months, 2 years, I would assume that if someone is performing and they're receiving performance evaluations iteratively throughout that 24 months, there should be some sort of standard or evaluation criteria that you all are using that can determine and kind of push that person out of that interim and acting status into full status, should they want the position.
And absolutely, and thank you for the question, Madam Councilwoman. And let me just say that only is true if the person that's in the interim capacity wants the job.
Yes, it does.
Right. So we do have instances quite frequently where a person is in an interim status, and they apply for the job and they get the job.
Yes, sir.
However, there are instances where a person is in an interim capacity and they're offered the job and asked to apply for the job, and they decline, unfortunately, for one reason or another. They may decline that offer, in which instance we are sourcing talent and trying to find the best person for the position, but in the interim, to have a certain level of continuity and consistency in that position, that person is in an interim position for a bit longer.
Sure. So my apologies. Let me rephrase the question. So I'm looking for evaluation criteria that you all are using to determine whether a candidate is appropriate for the position or not, if they want the position. So I know, there are outliers of, people not wanting the position, but you mentioned in your earlier report that timeline is a factor by which, we're keeping people in this interim and acting status. What other criteria are you using in order to determine whether the candidate is suitable for the position outside of timeline?
Whether or not the candidate has all of the minimum qualifications for the position. If a candidate is if a person is in an interim capacity and the position is vacant, if the person that's in the interim position applies for the position, if they meet the minimum qualifications, they will be forwarded to the hiring manager for consideration, to schedule them for an interview and for them to enter the interview process. Anecdotally, I am not aware, as I sit here right now, of anyone who was in an interim capacity that applied for the position and was not given that opportunity in short order. I can't think of one, but I can think of a couple that have been offered the position and have respectfully declined us.
Okay. And you just mentioned the minimum qualifications. I'm trying to get to specific criteria that you all are using. So whether it's project management certifications, whether it's
it will vary by position.
it will vary by
Because for example, if we look at the minimum qualifications for the director of finance, they will vary greatly from the minimum qualifications for the director of public works. So a person who's acting in an interim capacity may be acting in an interim capacity by virtue of the fact that they may have been the deputy. And they may be the next logical person to act in an interim basis to hold that agency together while a search is done. However, they may not have all of the qualifications. For example, this is hypothetical, that the director of finance may require be a certified public accountant, and the deputy isn't a certified public accountant, right? So they don't have the minimum qualifications, so they could not apply for the position even if we wanted to offer it to them because they don't have the minimum qualifications.
So I appreciate that. What I am looking for, so for instance, in my line of industry, project management, we have certain core competencies and criteria at the management executive level whereby we are to adhere to in order for us to be considered for the job. The specificity comes into play when we go into our respective industry, but there are core competencies at the foundation level. Has that been developed for executive vacancies in the city of Baltimore?
It sounds to me like what you're referring to is performance management, because with the performance management, those core competencies are identified for the employee. And for each position, there's a position description that is more specific to the role. And then we have classification specifications that are more broad for the grade or the classification. The position description outlines what the actual more specific role will do and what the requirements are. Again, those minimum qualifications are in the classification specification sheet, and in any person that's acting, I don't want to say acting in an interim because but any person that's serving in an interim capacity can apply if they meet those minimum qualifications, which are clearly articulated there.
And so I'm not describing core competencies as it relates to performance management. What I'm describing is the foundation level of core competencies that we have a standard of excellence all across the city of Baltimore. So like when you have those respective core competencies, you're able to have a group of individuals, and I know that they're going to change based on the agency, but they still have some foundation level management experience that we are looking at across the city that they have to adhere to in order to be in an executive position. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and again, I would push back on that. It will vary by the position. So there may be educational requirements. There may be requisite years of experience that are required. But those requirements will vary based on the position and what that person does. There is not an overarching list of competencies that we say this is applicable to every executive position. It literally is specific to that position.
Yep, but to that point, I think I get where you're going with your line of questioning. And I think when we start to get into the actual position grades and we get into the specifications, there are differences in the skills and abilities that you need to have to move from an operations officer 1 to an operations officer 2 or 3, for example, right? And so there are core competencies, I would say, at each level within our specifications of what you need to have mastered before you are ready for the next promotional opportunity. And that usually shows up in the class specs.
Oh, okay.
So we can provide you an example of that. Like the op officer might be a good, op officer 1 and 2, because that's a clear career pathway, right? It is a clear promotional opportunity. This is what you have to do and master at an operations manager 1 in order to get to an operations manager or officer 2. Mm-hmm. So I can provide that to you as an example, and then we can see if that is what you're looking for as far as core competencies.
Yeah, and the only reason why I bring that up is because our current performance management system is linked to our salary. And so I want to make sure that as we are moving up, we're promoting people, as the councilwoman shared earlier, we're promoting people, we're providing the professional development, but we also want to make sure that they have the core competencies at that level in order to perform as well.
And they know what it takes to move from one level to the next.
Yep, thank you, ma'am.
And I appreciate the question, Madam Co-Sponsor. I think what she was really getting at is when she's talking about core competency, she's thinking about things of like, certain minimum levels of financial acumen, ensuring that from a horizontal, vertical perspective, there's some level of integration, maybe towards like project management. So like when the mayor is sitting down with his cabinet, they're all on the same page as relates to how we move the city forward. Now, one might have a law degree, another one might have a financial background and be a CPA. However, there's a certain level of, again, horizontal integration that you try to drive in an organization. It's more of a corporate, private model, but I think that's where the councilwoman was going with that. And I appreciate the question, and would love if we could continue to progress and move there as a city. I think that the next person we have is Chairman Costello. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. The director at DGS is doing a fantastic job today with the air conditioning.
I will tell him that.
I like it cold, so I'm very appreciative. Please thank Director Attila. Director Herbert, I wanted to go back to the conversation around vacant and interim. I don't know that I fully understood what you were saying, so I wanted to ask if you could succinctly define each of those two statuses.
Sure. Acting versus interim.
Yes.
Acting is when there is for example, there is an agency head that is unavailable. They are on FMLA leave. They're out of the office, and the deputy is now the acting in that capacity, right? They're it while the director is out. Versus interim. Interim is where there isn't a person there. The director has resigned, has left, and the deputy is now the interim director, because they're going to be there for they could be there for 6 months, they could be in that role for 18 months. Where they're acting in that capacity for a shorter period of time, and the actual director is still with the city.
Can you give me an example from the org charts provided today? I have fire, DOT, health, BMZA, and DPW. Can you give me an example of one of those? I don't mean to call out a specific city employee, but I just want to understand if you could walk me through an instance of acting versus an instance of interim. I can give them to you.
I have them. No, I got them right here.
Thank you. Madam CAO.
Org charts. Okay. For the Department of Transportation, that is a correct title of interim because there is that person is right now serving as the director of DOT. There isn't a person that's in that pen that is out, right? For the fire department, now the fire department, this may be a misclassification because they have acting, but this also is an interim position because there is no permanent fire chief, so they aren't acting for the fire chief. They're the interim fire chief because there's no one in that position.
So Director Johnson, so it's interim Director Johnson, it's interim Fire Chief Stewart. Okay.
Yes.
That's helpful. Can we jump to the other ones with BMZA?
BMZA.
They're just,
Okay.
well, those are just vacants. And then we got DPW and Health. So like in Health Department, Mary Beth Heller, what is she?
I think she's the closest thing to acting. She would be considered acting because Dr. Jaraza is still here. And even though Dr. Jaraza is acting in another role, if we needed her to, she would be available to assist with those issues that rise in the health department.
So she's acting commissioner.
Correct.
Okay. And not to nitpick, I just wanted to get to to really understand the difference between the two, and that's why I was confused because I saw her as interim. And now DPW.
And when we get to DPW, is there a specific, oh, let's see where you're, for the,
Solid waste and WWW.
I can speak to solid waste. That would be an interim.
Okay.
And I also believe that water and wastewater would be interim as well because that person is no longer, the person that was the bureau head is no longer with the city.
So because Chief Cabete left the city.
So that person would be interim.
He's not on loan to someone. He's not on vacation. He's not out because of surgery, things like that.
I'll give you a clear example using personal experience. When I came over to the Department of Human Resources on an interim basis, because I was still here with the city and I wasn't appointed as the actual director at that time, there was a labor relations specialist in the labor commissioner's office where I came from who was the acting deputy because she served in my role while I was gone. I was still with the city, and there was a potential that I may have gone back to my position, right? So she was acting, not interim, because I was still here.
Okay, got it. Is that any of that outlined in our administrative manual? Is there a specific section you could refer me to?
It's that nomenclature is not specifically in our administrative manual. That's just it's a term of art. But I believe that we do use it in our succession planning document that provides the framework for succession planning.
I don't necessarily have an opinion, but do you or the CAO, do you believe that those are terms that should be defined in the administrative manual?
I don't believe so because it's six in one hand, half a dozen in the other. I think it's the nomenclature is, while they do have specific meanings, the functionality doesn't change.
Same, they're
It's
doing
the very same thing. A person is in the role of a higher position for a period of time, and they don't have the title, right? They're not the person. They're either acting or interim.
Got it. And then the second question I had, Mr. President, related to when staff are on loan to the mayor's office, another agency, do we have anything specific in the AM related to that from a policy perspective on how that's handled for the not the destination agency, but the origination agency?
I would
So if
have to-
a person's taken from DPW and detailed over to housing, do we have anything in the policy that provides guidance on how housing would handle that vacancy and functionality, and how they would go about expediting filling that vacancy?
I would have to review our transfer policy, but I can get back to you on that. I don't know that the transfer policy gets that specific.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. President, is that a request we can make of the committee, please? Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, sir.
Next, Chairman Conway.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, and want to thank my colleagues for the great questions. You guys stole some of my questions, which I always appreciate going last, because then it gives me an idea to think about other things that or second to last maybe. So a couple of things that came up to me while I was listening to a lot of what you said, and I appreciate we're in a pretty difficult situation right now. I think globally we're really challenged with recruitment, which I think led us to the conversation around promoting folks to fill these positions, training them as best as possible to fill these positions. I think the other major key here is retention. We didn't talk too much about that, and you know, I'm not sure how we've thought about that for our current staff, folks that we have on that we want to keep, understanding if they're happy, understanding what they need to succeed. You know, we have some really great employees working here with us for the city, great leaders, and doing what we can to keep them here is, I think, really, really important. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be really helpful.
Sure. I'll start with what we recently did to incentivize our commercial drivers. Commercial drivers are a critical vacancy, not only here in Baltimore City, but globally. And so the $10,000 hiring and retention bonus, it's still very early in the process, but I believe that that will go a long way in us attracting new talent to the city of Baltimore. We are advertising that with some of the community colleges in the area that have a commercial driving program, and getting in front of them and presenting the case that Baltimore City is a great place for them to come and to work. Also, I want to mention, you mentioned retention. I'd like to just share a bit about the job that we're doing at retaining our staff. We look at turnover data, and basically turnover data is the number of employees that left divided by the average number of employees times 100, right? And so when we look at our turnover data, typically if you have a rate of 10% or less in the marketplace, that's considered a good turnover rate. Right now, the city is at 13%, so we're right there, which means what that means is that 87% of our employees we're keeping. We're not losing them. So I think that there's a kind of misconception that we have a retention problem. I think our problem is attracting new talent, and this phenomenon that has been called quiet quitting, that many of us have heard about. Quiet quitting is not new. It didn't come with the advent of COVID. It's been around for years. What quiet quitting means is that employees do what the minimum is required of them, and that's it. Before COVID, it was not uncommon for many of our employees to work 10, 15, 20 hours of overtime. And so post-COVID, and many of those employees were the same ones who were our forward-facing employees at the apex of the pandemic. And so when this phenomenon called quiet quitting began to be discussed, what we began to see is that folks aren't working that number of overtime or that level of overtime that they were working pre-pandemic. So it's not an issue of losing people. It's an issue of we have to get staff up, and we also have to realize that we have to figure out a way for our employees to work their scheduled shifts and have enough staff to cover all that is required of them. I think that that's critically important. I think gone are the days of where we can rely on employees simply working a ton of overtime to get things done. And we're also looking at our vacancy rate as well. and what we can do to get more people, more employees into the city of Baltimore. So I think that, to your point, when we look at retention and we look at turnover rate, we're doing a very good job of holding on to people. We just got to get some more people in the door.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think what I'm thinking here is, what do we do to keep our ear to the ground on where our leadership is and how they feel about the work, their team? How do we make sure we always have that extra bit of intelligence to, let me also say this, we don't necessarily want to keep everybody. Sometimes it's just not a good fit, and that's okay. But when it is, when we have great leadership here, how do we make sure we keep them, we treat them well, and we understand their needs so they can continue to thrive in that position? So,
Chairman Conway, thank you for the question. And that question segues beautifully into a new initiative that we are starting in the Department of Human Resources.
You're welcome.
We recently recruited a new HR leader, and we started a new office, the Office of Strategic Engagement and Partnership. I believe that engagement is going to be the key to what you're talking about. Gallup tells us that 78% of employees are currently disengaged at some level. And that has a cost to it, right? 34% of salary is the cost of disengagement. So a third of what we pay in salaries, we're not really seeing a return of investment on that because of disengagement. And so one of the things that we are going to do is to get data from our agencies, from our employees, around engagement. And we are going to be working with agencies to develop teams that will be action teams, action planning teams, that will take that data and then make the requisite tweaks and changes that will re-engage our employees. And so that work is at the very infancy stages. We're just starting out. We're also going to leverage some of the technology that we have. In addition to Workday, there is a software called Pecan that will allow us to not only survey, but to also analyze the data in a way that will be very clear, concise, and will allow us to make some real action plans around how we can re-engage our workforce.
Can I speak a little bit to the agency directors themselves? So I think one thing that I want us to acknowledge is that the majority of the agency directors that we currently have here in the city of Baltimore, many of them were with us throughout the pandemic. Right, I already highlighted our commissioner who worked, tireless, countless hours, holidays, weekends, around the clock during the public health emergency. Our Rec and Parks director, right? Like there are agency directors. Every single agency director in this city rolled up their sleeves in a very real way during the pandemic. And what I have heard from our agency leaders, and having served as an agency leader myself, and a manager of agency leaders, is some level of just coming out of the pandemic and really just managing all that comes with it, meaning they are responsible for managing their employees, who many of them have experienced very traumatic events, right? And they are tasked with pouring into those employees, continuing city operations and city services when there are challenges even around their employees, right? They are tasked with investing in their employees' well-being. And we have to also pour into them as agency leaders and help them, give them the tools that they need to be able to better manage their employees. But we also need to invest in their well-being, right? We also need to invest in their health as well, and allow them space and room and time to be off, time to unplug, time to recharge and reset. And that's really important for me. I think the other thing that is also important is we've talked a lot about leadership development and developing that pipeline of leaders. Our leaders also want their own leadership development and leadership coaching as well. And again, those are also resources, that I am looking to bring to bear. I think I've mentioned this to Director Herbert as well through the partnership that we have with the Center for Government Excellence and some of the resources that they are bringing to the table, is they are helping our leaders, coaching our leaders through some difficult decisions that they have to make and ensuring they have the tools that they need to be successful. So I did just want to acknowledge our agency directors and some of the thinking that we're doing about how we can pour into their leadership growth.
I appreciate that, and I look forward to however it is we pull that together, because I think that's really important. And I know myself in leadership roles that I've stepped into, it's always a little bit disorienting at first, and then you get the hang of it, and then everybody, they start throwing stuff at you, and then you can barely keep up, and burnout is very real. Yeah. So I just want to acknowledge that. I think the other question, I know I'm not sure which of my colleagues was talking about this, but maybe all of them, but specifically around succession planning and how our agencies are thinking about succession planning. There was a report that Director, you handed out early this year. It was called DHR Succession Plan, Be More Prepared, Talent for Tomorrow and Beyond. And that report was really focused around the reality that we have a significant portion of our staff, of our city staff, that is eligible for retirement right now, and it's only going to get worse. And we know we need to begin to do succession planning for almost every position across the city. And I think this is ever more apparent for our leadership positions, in which, of course, you have older folks who are, of course, more likely to be eligible for retirement. But then you pack on burnout, you pack on the ability for them to go to other cities and make more, do less work, who knows. And I think this plan, I think, becomes that much more important. And I think there was one part of the plan that talked about training for agencies, and I'm really kind of curious on how we're thinking about that and where we are in that process, because I think very often our agency heads and otherwise are really just treading water. They're tackling the problems that arrive at their desk as quickly as possible, and they're not always able to take the time to think about who's going to replace them one day, or who's going to replace their direct reports one day. They're only really just trying to handle the water main break that happened right now. So how are we thinking about that from a training and sustainability perspective within our agencies, and how can we help them as much as possible begin to think about this in a sustainable way?
I'll take that question. I think that one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the Learning and Development Office and the robust curriculum that we've built out around learning and development, particularly for leadership. There are specific training modules for first-time leaders, people leaders, all the way up to agency heads. I've taken some of the training and have benefited from it, right? So I guess what we could do is a better job of marketing it. I know that we have been sending out the traditional e-blasts and things of that nature. But again, something that the CA mentioned, we have to create the space for our agency heads to feel comfortable to take that time away from their screen to do that, right? Some of my colleagues do not feel comfortable going to a professional development because they can't detach for 4 hours for a training. They feel that they can't, right? And so we've got to prioritize professional development, but we've also, something that the CA mentioned, is prioritize employee wellness. I think that training is a part of their overall wellness as well. And so I think that we have to prioritize that. I am open to suggestions. I think that this is not going to be necessarily an HR solution. I think this is going to be a culture shift across the city, where culturally we prioritize employee wellness and professional development at all levels of executive leadership, and not just at the top. But I do think that that gives us a start, that letting people know that the training is there and it's available and they can take it at their leisure, that is a beginning step or a first step for them to realize that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we're going to go to Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Director, I think on the definition of acting interim, one of the pieces that I didn't hear was when there is a new person coming on, we usually say acting until they're confirmed, correct? So it's not like somebody's there and then, they were appointed to the position, they just have to be confirmed. So if we're going to define it, we need to add that classification, I guess, because we've seen that before. I wanted to ask about, first of all, I think that it's just hearing all of the great questions and all of the responses about really working to stabilize executive leadership, to have performance measures, opportunity for growth. Super important, and I'm glad we're doing it. We didn't get to talk about the mayor's office. I don't know if that's appropriate here, Mr. President, but I wanted to try to explore this a little bit in terms of, the executive leadership there, because we have seen turnover recently. And, if we're doing this great work with our agencies, how does that translate to some of the executive leadership in the mayor's office?
And is the question around recruitment, retention, or all of the above?
All of the above.
Great. So I can speak to just the overall strategy. So one of the things that we have not spent a lot of time talking about in this hearing, and Director Herbert just mentioned it, and he talked about changing our culture, which is something that doesn't happen overnight, and it is something that can take years to really shift the culture. And it is not even about changing the culture as much as it is co-creating a culture. And one thing that I can, that I pride myself on as a leader is really creating an environment where that is open, an environment that is one driving towards excellence and a standard of excellence, one that prioritizes service. I think I spoke about this in my earlier remarks, and customer service above all. That's one thing that we haven't spent any time on that is a top priority for me. And so I think when it comes to the executive level, I think one, it is starting there, right? As far as shifting what the culture looks like. When it comes to political offices and mayor's offices and the like, those roles require a lot. Right? I think you all know you're in roles very similar. You have staff as well. They require a lot. They are 24/7 and nonstop. And I think what we are doing and what I will prioritize, and I try to prioritize with my own city administrator team, is what I said a bit earlier, right? It is providing some level of grace, providing some level of space for folks to unplug, to disconnect. But then it is also recruiting the right talent and putting the right people in the right seats, which I think is one of the most important tasks that we have to do in our mayor's office. As it relates to, I think I can talk a little bit about recruitment specifically. There are a couple of open roles that we have in the mayor's office. Some of those roles will be filled pretty quickly. And then there are other roles that we have been working on for some time that we hope to be able to move on and appoint some folks into those roles. What is important to me is the continuity of service and the continuity of leadership, and that we are able to continue to deliver, that we're able to continue to manage our agencies in the interim while we have some transitions.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of the fact that we've seen some turnover there, and that as we're trying to stabilize, and I think we're, again, doing a good job of how we're trying to address it at the agency level, making sure that that happens, in the mayor's office, because that obviously those are extremely important roles. as you know, and to really provide the public also with the confidence that we're all levels are prepared and ready to do this. So I was just interested in hearing a little bit more about how that was going. And I wanted to go back to something that my colleague, the sponsor, was talking about in terms of, she was talking about sort of core competencies, but in her question, I also heard values in terms of that every executive should have a set of values that you agree that are important, customer service being one of them, right? And also performance, that they've actually done that kind of work. So I don't know if that's what you were trying to get at, Councilwoman, but that's the kind of thing that, in terms of some of those real core principles of leadership that I think you're looking for and that we're looking for, and making sure that that's being imparted onto them, not just onto them, but that's what you're looking for in a candidate. So I guess to hear a little bit more, not just for the agencies, but also for the mayor's office and for all the positions, what those leadership principles that you're looking for are, so that we can be helpful, but also that it's just very clear a value system and a set of principles that the mayor's office and that your office and the city is saying, this is what we expect of our leadership. So that's, I think, another piece that I don't think we talked about much today, but I think that we were trying to get to is, what are those principles and values that are really, really critical. Skill set is super important too, but if you don't have a good, customer service, if you don't have, good management style, if you don't have, those are kind of a little bit more squishier, but extremely important. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yep, absolutely. So it's very interesting that you bring up values. I actually am doing a team offsite next week, and one of the parts of the team offsite is focused on renewing our values and our commitments. And so I think that is critical work that needs to happen. Many of our agencies go through similar exercises. I know at the health department, you can walk through the health department, you see their values plastered across the wall. So what I would say is that the values discussion is one that is key. I think they show up in particular places within our position specs, for example, right? Like there are some core values that show up. You'll see things that show up around customer service within some of our position specifications. But I think what is important here, and what is something that I am driving towards, is is really, and it's not even that it's standardizing it, but it is ensuring that we are very clear with the enterprise, especially now that I am formally in my role, about what good customer service means, right? Like, what do we mean when we talk about equity? And so I think that is a part of some of the early work that I'll be doing with our HR director, is around sharing kind of a set of, core values or expectations about how we expect individuals across our government to operate. We talked about customer service. Customer service is top of mind. I think my predecessor even did some early work around customer service and sending out a memo. These are the expectations, and being very clear about what it looks like to respond within 24, 48 hours, what your voicemail setup looks like, right? Like, there are some standardized processes that we can and should put in place. So I do think that there's an opportunity that I'll be leaning in with our HR director around ensuring that we're sharing those values enterprise-wide.
Thank you.
No, thank you. We're going to go back to the sponsor.
Thank you. I have one more question related to communication to the council. One of the action items that I was hoping to get out of this meeting was really establishing some sort of protocol with regard to communication to the council from the administration regarding executive vacancies. And so I'm curious, what do you envision a timeline as far as communication to the council and or follow-up to the council with those respective vacancies as well? So, like, in a certain amount of time, the council will be notified of a vacancy. We will have report outs by this time. We'll have follow-ups by this time. Like, I'm trying to establish that sort of protocol and communication expectation from the administration and the council.
Sure. So I think as it relates to appointed positions, I think there are a couple of things. I think we can make some commitments around how we will attempt to work together. I think we all know when it comes to personnel, when it comes to human resources, everything isn't always black and white, cut and dry, and we have to be respectful of the wishes of personnel as well, right? But I think when it comes to those appointed positions, we can work together and to identify what the proper timeline looks like. It may be off. Sometimes we might get a notification that someone is transitioning within a month, or in the case of Director Raymond, who was previously with us, I think he stayed on for almost a year, for example, right? And I think we did do the notification still, but I think we can try to come up with some protocols around a week, 2 weeks. I would have to go back and kind of look at what we've seen as far as our trends and what's appropriate.
Okay. And so, we definitely, I know you and I have confirmed to work together. I definitely want to make that a priority to report back out to the council, because one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of my colleagues is that the notification to the council is lacking. And so establishing that protocol to council members on all occasions, not just, appointed ones, I think that's what we're looking for. So I look forward to that further discussion. Thank you.
We're going to go to Chairman Costello and then to Chairman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. President. CAO Leach, in hearing some of the discussion today, I think that one of the things that would be helpful as we enter budget season, when we have our municipal agencies come in, is that they're prepared to discuss the number of vacancies or vacant positions within each agency, the number of those which they expect to fill by the end of the fiscal year, so June 30th, 2024, and what the plan is for those funds that are appropriated that won't be expended for those positions that are listed in the budget books. We can certainly follow up with written communication. I know we've been having a lot of positive back and forth communication as we lead up to the budget hearings, so that's something I just wanted to flag publicly, and that we'll make sure we follow up with in a more formal manner and make sure we memorialize in writing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next, Councilman Conway.
This will change a little bit of the flow because it seems like we're winding down. It just occurred to me, and I was kind of curious on where we were with filling the role for DLR. I know that that's a role that's been vacant for some time now, and we knew it was going to be vacant even before then. Just kind of curious. It's an acting role right now. Any sense of where that is?
Sorry, what was that position?
DLR. Yeah.
We can follow up. That can be an action item that we follow up.
Thank you.
I guess at this time, are there any additional questions or comments from members? I think there's, I counted 3 or 4 follow-up items, so I think the strategy is we're just going to put it in recess, provide the administration the opportunity to follow up with the information that we've requested today. Hearing and seeing no additional questions or concerns, I would like to thank Madam CAO as well as to the team from the administration, Director Herbert, Nina Themelis, and all the other parties that participated in today's hearing. We're putting in recess until a later date. Thank you so much.